Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming over to Plexal today, for braving the 30-degree temperatures in the London transport to join us for our first ever Cyber Lates. So I'm Saj Huq, Director of Innovation at Plexal. It's a real pleasure to host you tonight. Why have we called this Cyber Lates? Well, we, for a long time, have wanted to start running regular meetups here at Plexal. From a Plexal strategic perspective, we're on a mission to create the UK's most connected ecosystem. And we have operations running here, Cheltenham, and soon to be Manchester, amongst other locations. But our original genesis was always here on the Olympic Park in East London. And we now are very fortunate to have a very fast-growing and burgeoning and exciting community of startups and scale-ups and cybersecurity specialists who are starting to base themselves here. And therefore, we wanted to start providing content and meetups and community events specifically for that audience as well. So Cyber Lates, this is now going to be a quarterly fixture here at Plexal. This is going to be an in-person meetup for as long as we can. And we are going to look to replicate, we use this content afterwards and publish it online so people can catch up afterwards on the discussion here. But we really want this to be in person for the networking opportunity. So we really appreciate you all coming here today. The typical format for these and what we're going to do tonight is we're going to interview a cyber star, as we're going to call them, from across the ecosystem. So that might be an investor, it might be a startup, it might be a government policymaker in this field, somebody who's really at the top of their game. And I think, given the caliber of today's guest, I think we're, setting the bar pretty high straight away, so there won't be too much pressure, I'm sure, to repeat this in a quarter's time. So hopefully we can stick to this level of quality, which I'm sure we'll all experience in a sec when we speak to Dave. But firstly, just before we go over to the questions and the Q&A session, I just wanted to talk about how you can actually get involved in this community if you're new here to Plexal. So I mentioned about our operations in London, Cheltenham, and soon to be Manchester. We run a number of innovation programs on behalf of government and with government. We will be going live with a number of open calls in the next few months, where we're going to be scouting the ecosystem and sourcing capability, technologies, interesting companies, and those with high potential for very specific requirements. And those requirements might be because there's a big challenge that exists in the economy, in the digital economy, that we wish to solve working with startups, or it might be there is a big challenge that exists from a government perspective, and we want to work with one of our partners to solve that directly with you. However, that doesn't mean you need to wait until one of those open calls to get involved. And as I said, we're really starting now, we're coming out of COVID, hopefully, fingers crossed. We're really starting to grow this physical community here at Plexal. And we've recently, over the last couple of weeks, some of you may have seen this, we've recently launched an open offer to the whole community to join us as a member of Plexal, to become a workspace member here, where you have access to free desk space until the end of March 2022. Obviously an incredible opportunity, and given some of the amazing members that we've got here, I think it's pretty unrivaled actually in terms of a community that you can join. So if you are interested in that, go to our website, plexal.com, where you'll see all the details and you have the opportunity to apply. There is a competition because there's only a limited number of memberships available, so good luck. And I think it's now time to move over to introducing our wonderful guests. So we have the privilege, as I said, of being joined by a very, very interesting speaker tonight. Dave Palmer is the Chief Product Officer at Darktrace. Darktrace is a company, probably need very little introduction. I'm sure if anyone's in the cybersecurity space or interested in cybersecurity, they've heard of Darktrace over the last 8 years. But Dave's been on the journey with Darktrace from the beginning. He was one of the co-founders of the organization. He is behind the product. He has led the product team. He's scaled the business from the ground up, and he's recently been part of the leadership team who've taken the business public over the last 2 months. So we're really fortuitous that Dave has given us his time tonight to join us, and lots of interesting insights that he wishes to share as well about that journey end to end and life working within a public company, I'm sure. So Dave, welcome. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm worried about living up to the introduction. Thank you very much. And I absolutely need to apologize again for getting the ping of doom on the app. I was looking forward to having a cold glass of something with all of you, but I will be in lockdown till tomorrow morning. But I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And yes, sadly, we are direct victims of the pingdemic. Dave was pinged on Monday and couldn't join us, as he just said. But, we're living in a hybrid world these days, and so thank you for joining us on Zoom. So Dave, can you tell us about your background? How did you come to be in Darktrace?
It feels like 100 years ago since I did something that wasn't Darktrace, but it was only just after the London Olympics that we founded Darktrace. So obviously felt like a different era back then. A lot of things have changed. A lot of our language has changed. Cyber wasn't particularly a well-used phrase back then. Certainly AI wasn't. We used to talk about machine learning a lot then. But my background was running large infrastructures, building or running large infrastructures for the UK government. My systems were a victim of Edward Snowden, and one of the driving forces for me personally, not necessarily the organization as a whole, but one of the things that was apparent for me in the legal and the criminal investigation afterwards was all the data about that wrongdoing, regardless of your politics on it, the taking of data, the accesses that he had, it was all there. It was all written down in logs. The technology knew something strange was happening, but unless us as human experts went and asked exactly the right question, we'd never find out that activity or that attack was going on. And for me, that was the real driving force between why I wanted to get involved with Darktrace. It was, how could we find out about things that were starting to go wrong before they become a crisis, not afterwards? And yeah, here we are sometime later. It's rather a surprise that it's at the scale it is.
I know, it's fascinating. And I'll come back to some of those points in a sec. So one of the aspects of Darktrace's brand that I'm really interested to know your view on is why you've specifically gone to market as an AI company and not a cyber company. Was that a conscious choice at the beginning?
There's definitely evolutions here. So very much from the outset, we were a machine learning company. And AI wasn't a term that people used a lot. We focused very heavily on trying to explain machine learning, explain how it worked. Our sales process often involved me in front of a whiteboard trying to explain support vector machines or hidden Markov models or whatever it was to genuinely perplexed people that wondered why I was rabbiting on about it. But absolutely, the challenge of cybersecurity is one of the key challenges that are closest to our heart. But we're completely certain that the underlying technologies that we've built of looking for the strange and the unusual and then deciding on actions to take to try and correct it has applications outside of cyber. And genuinely, one of the motivations for going public is to be able to increase our investment into R&D in parallel so we can take on as many of these crazy ideas as we've got at the same time rather than having to do them sequentially, which is what we have been doing in the last few years.
Yeah. And what was the first year of Darktrace like? 2013, tell us what day in, day out it felt like starting up.
I think we were lucky that we felt pretty strongly that it was a good idea. And I do a lot of work with startups, including your your folks, and people don't always know they've got a good idea, but for some reason we had some surety. But there was this big headwind that in 2013 people thought FireEye had fixed cybersecurity, and they'd come out with their fantastic technologies. They were having a really good positive impact on the world. But we still knew it wouldn't be enough in the long term. We really felt and believed it, and were very passionate about it. But it was very much a year of educating everyone we met, constantly trying to explain why we believed that the sandboxes and the new generation firewalls weren't enough, and absolutely having to explain what machine learning was and why we believed it would add value to a security team who were already experts. And if you wind your minds back to 2013, that was around about the time when everyone's credit card stopped working every time you went to Birmingham, let alone got on a plane to Beijing. So, the machine learning didn't necessarily have the public trust behind it yet, and will. And as it moved into the AI phase, that was even more of an education challenge to say why it wasn't, going to cause an uprising that murdered all of human civilization. So it just felt like education all the time. And of course, you build a product, it doesn't work half the time, you have to fix it, you have bugs that you weren't ever imagining, all of those problems that everyone has. But it definitely felt like a constant education process. And that's the overwhelming memory I take away from it.
Yeah, and I should say, folks, you will have, if you have any questions, do feel free to raise your hand, and I'll come to you and relay them over to Dave as well. But I just to pick up on that, I understand obviously about education. Obviously, we work with a lot of startups. Startups tend to be pioneering a lot of new ideas and technologies. And yes, there is always a process, typically, of trying to educate your customer so that you can meaningfully commercially engage them in the end and get them to buy into what you're trying to take to market. But how did you know, what were the initial proof points that you started to see that you guys had, you felt like you had something the market was validating? Like, when did you start to feel that was emerging?
I think there's two different levels to that question. The first was just the experiences on the ground. Technically, we were finding attacks that were in progress inside of organizations. Some of our early customers were some of the bigger power stations in the UK, some Silicon Valley firms, and people still reacted really differently to finding cyber attacks back then. So every now and again, someone we were engaging with would get fired because we found something. And thank goodness the world has moved on since the sort of any attack gets you automatically fired type of view. But the really big shift that I think was transformative for the business was when someone came up with the immune system analogy that Darktrace uses all the time. So we didn't start with that. In fact, early Darktrace messaging was very machine learning oriented. All of our color scheme was like an EasyJet departure lounge. It was all black and orange. And at some point, that got completely reworked. I think it was within the first year, approximately. And someone came up with, it wasn't me, the enterprise immune system analogy, and talking to customers and the press and saying, well, your traditional cyber defenses are like this protective skin, and then we make this thing that learns all about the people in your organization and automatically responds if an attack gets inside. And that ability to cut through, frankly, my machine learning mumbo jumbo and cyber talk and what me and the techies were doing, with something that you could easily tell family members what you were doing, or you could drop into conversation at, I was going to say a cocktail party, but cyber doesn't often come up in cocktail parties.
It doesn't, cyber lates.
Yeah, well, yeah. Oh, and I've missed it. But that ability to cut through absolutely transformed the impact we started having when we were meeting people. And I should find out who came up with that. We should make sure they got a massive bonus for it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure the IPO has sorted them out. But yeah, no, it's really interesting actually, because I mean, it is, everyone knows cybersecurity is a complicated field, and I think, you know, sometimes it is a struggle to really convey what a technology is trying to do, the problem it's trying to solve, especially to the non-technical audience, who typically, you know, in an organisation will control the budgetary decisions. So it is fascinating actually, and I think there's lots that we can all learn from that message in terms of how we, you know, how we try and take new ideas to market and sell them. It's really interesting. I think when you start to see that initial traction, can you tell us a little bit about the scaling journey that you went on, and how the company started to grow? And what I'm particularly interested in is how formulaic was that process, or rather, you know, were you just being led by this rocket ship that was starting to gather momentum?
Possibly a few people in the audience have heard me joke about this a number of times, but for a long time we ran Darktrace from a whiteboard. We track everything: how long it took to get a meeting with a customer, how long before they agreed to a trial, how long they took to install it, how long they trialed it for, all the way through to a signature or dropping out of the process along the way. And we would look for places that were bottlenecks, and we'd look for places that were never resource constrained. And one of the things that is relatively easy to do in the cybersecurity world is meet people, because there are so many conferences, there are so many places where potential buyers and potential sellers are convened, that I guess in sales speak, leads are never a problem. It's never a difficult problem finding someone to meet. And after a little while, we started working out formula for how many salespeople we would need for a certain number of events we would go to follow up on the outcomes of that event, and how many engineers would we want to underpin those salespeople with. And then eventually, when you have things like inside sales forces and marketeers and all of that type of stuff, and we still use all those formula today, and most of them haven't changed. So we do look for small optimizations every now and again, but your business will have a natural ratio of different types of people in it. And when we started to understand that, it meant that we were growing pretty efficiently, because you knew if you're going to double the number of leads coming in, that there was no value in spending that money unless you were going to alter everything else in the right ratios. And that's part of Poppy's genius. I know, Saj, you've met Poppy, a ferociously analytical mind. And that's how she thinks about the business. What are the ratios? What are the interconnected bits? What are the bottlenecks? Where can you unlock more progress? And that's incredible. And I think, sorry for rabbiting on, but one other thing that was really very powerful was making it everyone in the company's job to make the sales process as easy as possible, but especially dev. And I don't mean developers and researchers being part of the sales process directly, but can you de-skill what it takes to do an installation? Can you de-skill training needs and make it easier to learn for itself, or automatically learn through prompting? And anywhere there's friction on that whiteboard I was telling you about before, what can be done, even to legal T's and C's. So one of the things we used to have to do was negotiate all of our contracts, because people would argue about all the different terms and what regions the data was stored in and what have you. But if you can put technical work in to make that the customer's choice, or to take the risk to near zero, then you absolutely accelerate your entire commercial machine by doing something that often the developers think is really boring. Like, they never want to sign up to that work, but it's what makes the engine far more rapid and repeatable if you can deliver that sort of change.
That's really fascinating. Are there any questions from the audience? Because I know that's Dave's insights there is quite, hands-on. Yes, hi. Sorry, if you introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, hold on. We do have a roving mic. Bear with us, Dave. I think we're all good.
Awesome. First of all, thank you. Great event and great speech so far. My name is Enrico Faccioli. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CData, a cybersecurity company, obviously. One question. You touched on how many salespeople you would need to follow up with leads, et cetera, et cetera. Can you touch on channel sales and partners if you're relying on them? And when have you started engaging with them?
Super mindful this is recorded, right? So I've got to open with, all of our partners are amazing and our business I'm grateful for every single one of them, and every single one of them is the best partner we have. Joking aside, it needs much more thought than you'd imagine, or it needs more thought than I'd imagine as, some network engineer who's suddenly put a suit on. Quite a lot of the channels used to ship in firewalls that are exactly known quantity with perfectly stable specifications that are completely uncomplicated, and you just kind of turn them on and they work. And forgive me, I look forward to learning more about CData. I don't know a ton about your business model yet, but that may not be the best fit for you. In which case, what is the channel for? Are they just lead generation? Are they delivering value-add services on top? How will they make their money? Will they make their money by profit sharing your stuff, or will they operate some consultancy and professional services or ongoing monitoring on top, which is where they make their money? And all those things might sound like tedium and detail, but you want to align incentives where you can, and you want to make sure that you're definitely in the UK market. People tend to tell you the way that things are normally done, and our experience is, but what if you're not selling firewalls or what have you? So for us, the channel is predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly lead generative, and then we do profit sharing. And that works really well for us, and it works well with the partners because everyone is clear on what is going on. But most people aren't able to sell another 1,000 days of expert professional services on top of what we're doing. And that means certain parts of the channel market will never be appropriate. And it's worth thinking that through. And if you want to email me, we can chat that through, because otherwise you end up throwing spaghetti at the wall with literally thousands of partners out there without quite knowing what's sticking and why.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. We'll definitely email you. Looking forward to chatting.
Dave@darktrace.com is pretty memorable. The benefits of being one of the earlies.
Easy. Thank you.
Brill. I think we've got a question back as well.
Hi, my name's Shivan. I'm not a C or anything. I'm just a student. What advice would you give to anyone who wants to break into the cybersecurity field by way of a startup?
Doing it as a startup is about the hardest possible way of breaking into the field. My goodness. The field's pretty welcoming these days. There's everyone's hiring. Salaries are great. Career opportunities are seemingly endless. There's no business in the world that won't need, or there's no organization in the world that won't need cybersecurity somewhere in there. And the amount of knowledge you can glean from YouTube and other courses without spending any money is incredible. And so I think anyone could bootstrap themselves into cyber. And I would, if anyone feels that financial reasons are a reason not to get into cyber because there's too much of an initial startup cost, then don't worry about that, because you can easily skill up without spending any money at all. and new companies like Immersive Labs and what they're doing for academics and young people are a great example of really adding to that. Starting a startup, though, super hard because the amount of time you spend doing the bit that you love in the early days versus the amount of time you spend doing everything else, like thinking about what the HR contract is going to be and how do you get a bank account when you need this form first, but you can't get that form until you've got a bank account, is tough. And it's rewarding as you look back on it, but it may not feel rewarding at the time. So I absolutely would commend anyone to innovation. I think if you're going to do a startup, you want to meet some other people that are going to come on the journey with you and share that load. But go for it. If you've got a good idea, go for it. And if you haven't got the idea yet, you'll be so welcome in cybersecurity. There's tons of things you can do. You can easily move around and experiment. And you can always do the startup in a few years' time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That's been wicked so far. I assume that you guys have to hold yourselves to a very high level of cybersecurity yourselves. How do you balance that with the culture of high growth, innovation, move fast and break things, to steal a quote?
I don't know that the UK scene does move fast and break things. I think one of the things that's really good about the UK startup scene and Europe generally is we don't try and be Silicon Valley, and that we aren't just pummeling money into millions and millions of ideas and seeing if which ones are winners. You have organizations like Lorca and Plexal who are bringing people together and trying to lift all boats and say, why don't we try and make everyone that's operating this space effectively? So apologies for disagreeing with you on that bit, but I feel pretty strongly about it. And I would be really sad if the UK scene turned into Silicon Valley that has a lot of negative sides to its culture, especially diversity and inclusion. However, how do you do cybersecurity in a place like us? We're so paranoid. And it doesn't help that a lot of the influential people have had intelligence backgrounds in places like GCHQ and at MI5, including our CISO. One of the things that we do is there's zero crossover apart from in email in the systems that people who are customer facing are using and where the customer's data actually gets processed and ended up in the development team and DevOps. So we can have a different level of protections for those people running around, clicking on LinkedIn and answering 7,000 emails a day, almost certainly remote and mobile in normal times when we're not all in lockdown, from the people that have all the root keys and the access to the data centers and the cloud privileges. And having that separation means a lot of better sleep at night because you can have a totally different risk posture on it. We have a very low risk posture, as you might imagine, on anything processing customer data, because that would be nerve-wracking if there was a problem there. But salespeople, a lot of them are very young. It's their first job. It's their first time in an office. They're traveling the world in normal times, and they're constantly interacting with people they've never met before. You can't tell them not to click on a link. You can't tell them not to open an attachment when their job is to interact with people that they don't know. So, yeah, we cut the risk in half by cutting the business in half.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
I think there's a question here as well, and then we've got two questions at the front.
Hi, Dave. This is Joe Boyle from Salt DNA. I only get one question, right? Well, I suppose you can choose to pick one of these. How did you come up with your pricing strategy? How has it evolved, if it has? And would you have done that differently? And if you want to go a completely different direction, any regrets, any major mistakes that you would give to kind of people at our stage? I'm part of Lorca Ignite, and I think we all share the same kind of position of having a product, having good customers, and trying to get to the next stage and that stage of growth. So I prefer to answer both, by the way.
Saj and I were just talking before, and one of the things that I said to him that I strongly believe with if I had to give 3 pieces of advice, this would be one of them. And that is, very few things are fixed in stone, and you don't need to leap to big decisions. You can get there through experiments. And so we have a very strong experimental culture. What I don't mean it, the culture of the company is out there and weird. I mean, when we want to try new things, we will pilot it and agree in advance what the measures of success of that pilot are going to be, and how we would compare different approaches. And I don't mean in like 20-page documents, but if you're going to kick something off, like say, hey, we're going to throw all this up in the air and go to a SaaS pricing model, why don't we pilot that in Japan, where there's a dominant language over there that's not shared with the rest of the world. We can talk about this loads in Japanese without it leaking across the rest of the globe. Or you can just pick 5 salespeople and say, you folks only to operate in this way going forwards, or you're going to use this language in negotiations, or you're not to negotiate anymore. You just show them this table and you work from there. And just take the stress out of it by giving a bunch of different mechanisms a go. Of course, you'll have to live with whatever contracts you let during that journey. So you may have a handful of weird contracts that you have to normalize later on, but far better than having to make a existential decision in one go and hope you get it right. So yeah, I'd say go careful. I'd say don't change too frequently, because it's very easy to screw deals up if you're changing the pricing strategy every quarter or something like that. But it can evolve. We've released 10 products in the last 8 years. So we've always had an excuse to change the pricing anyway, because there's always been adding new things. But yeah, I'd say take the pressure off yourselves. Otherwise, it's a nightmare.
Thank you.
And Phil as well, Captain.
Hello, it's Phil Sorrell from Cybersmart. I wanted to ask you on the inspiration-perspiration spectrum, if you're looking back at what you needed to succeed, where were you on that spectrum, and what were the key ingredients?
Wow. Everything that we say is, of course, survivor bias. And everything I've said tonight should be taken with a pinch of salt, right? Because it might be completely disconnected to our success so far. Luck, I think, plays a part. But working hard is something that is in your gift. Knowing whether your idea is inspired or not is not in your gift. Obviously, we all hope our ideas are inspired. Having said that, one of the other things that Saj and I were talking about beforehand is the early team, or the team that are going to run with the idea, really need to look each other in the eye and decide how fast you want to go. Because if you have team members that want to go at different speeds, you can definitely have friction, and you'll lose people along the way. And we lost a couple of people from the early team. Still friends, but they've gone. And it's because we all got together and said, we want to go as fast as possible and try as hard as we can to make as much progress as quickly as we can. I said to Saj, we use a fighter jet analogy. And everyone knows fighter jets can go very fast and they can soar very high. But when it gets bumpy, there's usually vomit in the cockpit. And that is actually a phrase we use internally, that when something's bumpy, we say, well, have we made a major mistake here? Or is this just teething problems at the next scaling break? Or is it a process that we could fix, but we're better off just leaving broken until there's another point of inflection and then fix it at that point? And I think sometimes one of the hardest things when you're scaling super fast is deciding what you're not going to fix now, and you're just going to leave being a loose end because you need to put your management team's attention somewhere else.
That's fascinating. A really, really good analogy as well. I mean, there must have been times, Dave, where you must have thought, have I done the right thing here? Are there easier ways to make money?
I mean, all the time. And every time you go to the next stage, there's something new to worry about. And I think I think the thing that you get very quickly is you realize, are we building a team and a culture that will support each other to solve challenges, or do we need to make some changes? And is there anyone on the boat that maybe shouldn't be on the boat anymore? And that's really tough. Or someone needs to come in above someone else because we've hit a new requirement for level of knowledge or performance or whatever. But there's always something. I thought the IPO was terrifying. I mean, you're just staring down the barrel of something you've never done before, that very few UK tech companies have ever done. I'm pretty sure we're the first out-and-out AI company to have IPO'd in London. And we were talking to a lot of people that clearly didn't know anything about AI. It's not like talking to early stage VCs and angels and seed that all understand AI to some degree these days. The public market investors have got absolutely no idea. And so, yeah, I think you always worry about something. However, I will say I'm a worrier. So you'd get a very different answer off of Poppy, our CEO, who is the most energetic optimist you'll ever meet.
Really interesting. And was the original vision, was it always to scale a company to the public markets? Was that a clear target?
I mean, in your wildest dreams and when you're having a laugh in the pub or what have you, but, we're a bunch of relatively modest individuals most of the time. And of course, you don't know if the idea is a good one for a long time. You don't know if it will work or what have you. I think what we really wanted to do was to have an answer to the sorts of attacks that were going down in 2013, 2014, and help CISOs be able to sleep at night a bit better. And the things that were starting to happen in the national power grids, in power stations, in defense, etc. It was a different time then, of course. It was, we had the target hack and what have you. And so it sounds like it's a canned line, and it isn't. It was more focused on how could we help customers and people and organizations. And that's probably the right way around. And I'm glad it was that way around.
Right. I think we might just have time for a couple more questions just to wrap up. But just one last one for me really is, how did it feel the day before listing and the day of listing? Journey.
I'm pretty sure that my PR team would say we were confident the whole time, and it was absolutely fine. But an enormous sense of relief. Anyone that followed the Darktrace IPO would have seen there was a lot of headwind in the press. There was we were coming shortly after Deliveroo, who had dented short-term confidence perhaps in the London market. But as you're going through the IPO, as possibly you're all aware, what you spend all of your time doing is not writing prospectuses and stuff like that. That kind of happens by accident in the evenings. that you spend all of your time trying to educate people on your plans, your beliefs, your culture, your team, and where the business is going. And of course, a massive amount of technical detail about the finances and how the business operates. And then it feels like waiting for exam results because you believe you've got a great business and that this is the right move for you and you're a good fit for being a public company, but you don't know anyone else's company. You don't know what, who else, who's about the same size as us. People like Rightmove and companies like that. I've no idea what it's like inside of those organizations, or Avast, they're another company at sort of similar-ish size. Maybe they're fundamentally different and maybe they've done their homework better than us. And you don't know. You don't get any feedback until the day that the numbers start going around on the London Stock Exchange. And if you're Poppy, you're a super optimist. And if you're me, you're sort of clinging on for dear life and hugely relieved when it all goes down. But we've had an incredibly warm reaction ultimately from the European investors, and their appetite for cyber and AI seems very high. It's not about Darktrace specifically. Their interest, it's far broader than that. So all of you folks that are building something cool and building something new, you'll be extremely welcome when you get there. And if we can help at all on the journey, then please let me know.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. There's maybe time for one last question. So, yeah.
Hi, Dave. Dan here from CyberOwl. Two questions for you, one looking back and one looking forward. So looking back, how early on did you have to make a painful decision around team change? And what lessons did you learn from addressing that? And then looking forward, what's the product strategy look like for Darktrace looking forward?
Oh, two massive questions. And congratulations what you've done on CyberOwl so far. I think maritime cyber is super interesting and can't wait to see what you guys keep doing. Best piece of advice I've had on that team fit is again from Poppy. And the paraphrasing, it is, don't wait when you know there's a problem, because it never gets any better. As soon as you know someone isn't a fit anymore, then you should, for their benefit and yours, act as soon as you reasonably can. And not in an insincere way, not being brutal, but it does no one any favors when you realize the team structure or the team fit isn't right. And these things evolve. And we've had a lot of success in working with people and saying, we're not sure this role's fit for you anymore. That doesn't mean that Darktrace isn't fit for you anymore. Here are some other options. And why don't we give one of these a go or run it as an experiment? Obviously, there are limits. If you're in disciplinary territory, if they're a totally broken cultural fit, then that's that. But as you scale, you will just get to positions where someone isn't the right person to drive that function to the next level. Product strategy going forwards. I'm delighted to be able to talk about this now because we were really protective of it pre-IPO, but then we started talking about this a lot more in the IPO. So if you think about what Darktrace does today, it's detect, investigate, respond. And that's what the three different primary technologies in the platform are doing. The next thing that we're working on and super excited about is preventative in two dimensions. And one is, if you have a patient zero experience, how do you immediately armor the rest of the business so that you've learned from patient zero and that attack can never be repeated and near instantaneously? So if 1,000 people get targeted by a malicious email and it's slipped through your defenses, then as soon as someone's interacted with that first one, then you want to make the rest of the business safe from it, even if it's already present in the business. The second side of it is all this external testing that generates massive to-do lists of things that need to be patched or fixed. what if Darktrace could consume that and immediately offer mitigations to some of the problems that you can't fix? So if you can't go and patch that bit of a water treatment plant because you'd have to spend $500 million replacing it, then can you mitigate those risks with controls elsewhere in the business in a way where the machine consumes the risk information and then offers up mitigations without having to be told exactly what that looks like? I'm really excited about that. I've had a whole career of not being able to patch things that were clearly broken. And for various reasons, sometimes they're in a submarine, sometimes they're in a battlefield, but you can't fix it, so you have to mitigate it somewhere. Stepping on from that, we have some ideas about augmenting human teams in how they do remediation and healing when a patient zero has been infected or some data damaged. But the overall goal is, if you've got detect, investigate, respond, feeding prevent, feeding heal, and they can feed back into detect, investigate, respond, and go round and round and round, then we have a positive feedback loop of security getting better in a relatively automated way and autonomous way inside of the business. And that feels really exciting. We're definitely not going to just go and start competing in firewalls or antivirus or anything like that. We want to keep focusing on things that we think we can add that are complementary to the rest of the ecosystem, not picking fights with things that people already do.
That's brilliant. I think, just looking around the audience, I think that's it for questions, and we're right on time. So, Dave, it's been brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing those thoughts and insights and your time, of course. Obviously, sad we couldn't see you in person, but completely understanding of the current pandemic, as I mentioned. So thank you for still making the time to dial in. It's been incredibly insightful. Clearly, you're a very competent fighter pilot, and you've operated quite smoothly over the last 8 years. So congratulations on your successes, and thank you for being so supportive to our community.
It's always a pleasure doing anything with Plexal and your lovely team, but honestly, if there's anything we can do to help others, then we'd be delighted to. But there's one thing I don't feel I really got it across, that if I could end with, the best way of growing your teams is to find passionate people and then give them the skills afterwards. And if you bring them in from diverse places, we have philosophers and poets as part of our AI team now, building the systems. It answers lots of societal problems, but also it just gives you the most wonderful team with these different perspectives that are really amazing at solving problems. And if you can do that as well as have these great ideas, then no doubt you'll all be incredible successes. And I can't wait to see what you will build.
Thank you, Dave. Well, wow, what a lovely conversation and lovely guy. That was a very uplifting, optimistic way to close, so thank you. And thank you all for joining us for our first Cyber Late. So hopefully you've all enjoyed that conversation. So as I said at the start, this is now going to be a quarterly meetup. It's going to be here in Plexal. There's loads of opportunities to get involved. Do check out our community as well and the offer to join us and take benefit of free workspace here until the end of March 2022, because not only do you get obviously an office in the coolest place in London, but you also get access to incredible people such as Dave, such as our lovely team who help a number of our startups day in, day out as part of their own journeys, and we'd love to work with you too. So do check it out, do get involved. We hope to see you here again. For those of you who are here in person, there's lots of beers, wines, or suitable soft drinks for you to enjoy and network over, like old pre-COVID times outside. So do tuck in and enjoy. And Dave, thank you again. Look forward to catching up soon. Thank you, everyone.